Welcome to the 10K Creator, a podcast with me, Daren Smith from Craftsman Creative, and your own Joe Polizzi, where we document and break down how I and other content entrepreneurs can get to 10,000 email subscribers and $10,000 per month in revenue.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Joe Polizzi. This is the 10K Creator Podcast. We're so happy to have you. We're excited about this new series we've got going on. I'm going to welcome my friend Daren Smith. Welcome. You made it back for episode 2. So hey. Congratulations.
I'm even wearing the same shirt. What do you mean?
And I'm wearing the same hat. It's amazing how these things happen. Although I promise you for episode 3, we're going to change our clothes for those people who are watching this. Why don't we, this is episode 2. This is really where we're starting to get into how we're going to get this thing started, thinking about our mindset. But why don't you take us to a little bit about where we were last episode? And for those of you that didn't listen to episode 1 of the 10K Creator Podcast / show, please do that, because we talk about, thinking about what we want to be as creative or content entrepreneurs. But why don't you tell us where we're going to go in this episode?
Absolutely. So just to recap episode 1, one of the most important things you need to do as a creator is shift your mindset into one that's going to help you get the outcomes that you care about for your life, for your business, for your family. And that's what the first episode was about. And in every episode, we'll talk about some mindset shifts that you can make. We have some in this episode as well. So make sure to listen to the end, because that's really the takeaway that you can go and apply to your business. So this episode, we're talking about getting started. And that could be people who are starting a new project or a new business or coming up with a new idea, or even people who have been at this for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, and they're still in that like 0 to 500 range. Now, again, when we talk numbers, we're talking not only about followers or email subscribers specifically, but we're also talking about revenue. And so if you're in this range, you're probably experiencing things like you've made a little bit of money, but it's not consistent. There's no system or machine that's like getting constant traffic, constant awareness and engagement and conversion on your products. Maybe you haven't even created a product yet. And you've also experienced like trying to grow your email list or your social media, and it just isn't working. Most of your friends or most of your followers are friends and family or people that you've met along the way. There's not a lot of focus there. There's no intent to get people into your business from those social media profiles. So, Joe, this ties in perfectly to your book. And that's why we're starting here, because again, I read your book last year and it was one of the very influential things that made me think that I could actually try my hand at this creator thing. So what's kind of your advice for people in this stage of their creator journey, and what should they be focusing on? Hey there, we will get right back to the show after a few quick words about our incredible sponsors.
Whether you have an established following or you're just starting out, books are an easy way to build credibility, diversify your revenue streams, and connect with your community. And just like Daren, you can use Lulu's free platform to turn your best performing content into a beautiful book to benefit your creative endeavors. With their e-commerce plugins, growing your audience and selling your work directly has never been easier. Create an account today to publish, print, and prosper at lulu.com, Lulu.com. Watch your first YouTube video. Read your first blog post. Find your first newsletter. Listen to your first podcast episode. Now, compare it to your most recent piece of content. It's night and day, isn't it? That's how much your content has grown, how much you've grown. If you're like most creators, your email marketing platform reminds you of that first creative effort. It has not kept up. You need a fresh start. Get that fresh start with ConvertKit. StreamYard is the easiest way to create content right in your browser. You can multi-stream to your social media platforms, host a weekly show with special guests, create webinars, record podcasts, create videos, and more. And they make it easy to brand and customize your videos inside the studio before you even go live. StreamYard's a popular tool amongst live streamers, video creators, YouTubers, and podcasters. StreamYard makes it simple to get professional and polished content every time. Get started now for free at StreamYard.com. So let's talk about getting started. So Content Inc., I wrote Content Inc. in 2015. The new edition came out in 21. And it was my story and my process, if you will, and the framework that I found through all sorts of failures to where I created something the way we're going to talk about on this show, and then was able to sell it for a good amount of money. And my wife's very happy and my kids were happy. It's all good. It was great. It was a great outcome. But as you were saying, we know a lot of creators that are in the position where they start, they're frustrated. I can't tell you how many emails I get a week, Daren, from, hey, I've been doing this for 6 months. I've been doing it for a year and a half. I'm just not getting the numbers I want. I'm not making the revenue. I've got to take a side job. We get it, right? We've all been there. It's really frustrating. In this first 0 to 500, and I'm glad you called out revenue, because we want to get to revenue as soon as we can, because we've got to keep the lights on and we've got to buy as many ramen noodle packets as we can so we can feed those kids. So we want to make sure we do two things. And I talk about this in the Content Inc. book. The first one is really identify and write down your sweet spot. And the sweet spot is the intersection between what your audience's desire is, like what are their pain points, what's keeping them up at night, and really identifying that audience itself. And on the other side, what's your expertise? Why are you doing this in the first place? So when I started figuring out this whole content marketing thing, I was like, oh, well, we're targeting marketers and content marketers specifically, and they're really trying to figure out how they can leverage content as part of the marketing function itself. And that was a new thing back in 2007 and 2008. Now, my expertise was very different. I was coming at it from a publishing standpoint. Been a publisher for the last decade. I understood the process of building a media brand. And I'm like, oh, this is what companies are going to have to do. And marketers need to learn this. And that was my sweet spot. I felt really, really good about it. The problem is most content entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs, they stop there. They're like, good, I've got it. Let's create our blog post. Let's do our podcast. I'll create an editorial calendar. Everything's great. You have to go on to the next level. The next level is the most important one. It's what we call the content tilt. It's why we named our company The Tilt, because I'm such a believer in finding your differentiation. I'm going to define what content tilt is. It's finding an area of differentiation where you can break through all the other content clutter out there so you can find your audience. It's really, really important that you're not talking about the same stuff that everyone else is talking about and doing it the same way. And that's why a lot of content entrepreneurs are not successful, because they're like, oh, what are the frequently asked questions about this? I'm going to write a blog post to do a podcast just like that. And what we see is a lot of sameness. And I'll tell you firsthand, and it's tough in the whole creator economy space right now. If you look at a lot of the newsletters, Daren, and you know this, we read the same stuff. There's a lot of sameness. Mm-hmm. And that's why at the Tilt with our newsletter that goes out twice a week, we really are working hard to say we've got to differentiate this. Now, our differentiation, now, a couple things in the content Tilt. I'll give you two examples, and I want to hear about yours, Daren. So when we started Content Marketing Institute, our differentiation, our content tilt was the term content marketing. Nobody used that term at the time. It was a new term. I felt through my research, from my talking with audience members firsthand, and I absolutely did this. I got on calls with a lot of people. I actually used a phone back in the day, and I asked them about the term content marketing. They didn't know about it, but they were intrigued because it was part of marketing. Every other term at the time was custom publishing, custom media, branded content. It didn't have the kind of resonance we were looking for with content marketing. And of course, as you know, now it hit. It took about 2 years for it to hit. By 2010, it was taking off. By 2011, we did Content Marketing World, and everything was going gangbusters. And I think it was because our focus on content marketing that was different. We were talking about it when no one else was. It was before anyone was even asking questions about it. And then when it started to get popular, we were right there. We were all, I think we had at one time 7 of the top 10 results, because we had a lot of, in Google, because we had a lot of partners that we were doing guest blog posts for as well. Okay, let's fast forward 15 years to starting the Tilt. New initiative. We're in a lot of the same position that people listening to this are. What's our content tilt for this one? Well, we're leveraging the same strategy, but we're using content entrepreneur. You've heard me say that quite a few times. I believe everybody talks about content creator. In my opinion, everybody's a content creator. My mom's a content creator if she posts on Facebook, right? I don't think there's enough differentiation there. Content entrepreneur, which nobody uses, and I guess it's starting to get picked up. I feel good about it. A lot of people like that. You use creative entrepreneur, I think, a little bit. I know Roberto Blake uses creative entrepreneur. I like content entrepreneur because it focuses on not all creators. It focuses on content people. And it focuses on, I'm trying to create a financially sustainable business. That's the entrepreneur part. And a lot of content creators out there are not thinking business first. This is first a business, then you're doing content. It's not you're doing content, then you're doing a business. And that's hard for us content creators to think about because we're doing blog posts and we're doing YouTube videos and we're doing all the things. So anyways, that's the start with the process. So everyone listening to this in that 0 to 500 area, you have to figure out what your sweet spot is. Of course, you probably already know that. You probably have it written down in a mission statement somewhere. But do you have that differentiation? Are you truly going to break out of the pack by doing something different? Is it a different audience that you're targeting? Is it a term that you're targeting? Is it the way that you present the content is completely different? Is it a process like I would say yours? And this is where I want you to unpack yours, Daren. I'm curious if it's the craftsman process, the outcome-based approach that a lot of people don't use is sort of your tilt. So I talk too much. There you go. There's my whole thing. I want to hear from you. So how would you go about maybe with your leading from your example at Craftsman Created?
Yeah, I think you go about it consciously, and you've really expressed that it has to be something where you're shifting your mindset from this is what I want to make to this is a business, which means you have customers and you're serving people and you're creating value. And if you're missing those parts, then you're just going to be treading water, creating your stuff. And like me, 10 years later, go, why haven't I gotten anywhere? Yeah. Because you didn't have any propeller. You didn't have any focus. It was just, well, I'm doing what I want to do. And it's trying to follow that field of dreams. If you build it, they will come mentality, which does not work in the content entrepreneur or creative entrepreneur world. I think I use them interchangeably, not super consciously, but I like your differentiation. So let me answer your questions and kind of walk through the process I did, because I very consciously followed the Content Inc. model to identify my sweet spot and figure out what my expertise was and how I was going to serve people using that differentiation of the tilt. So I started out realizing this is right at 2020, and I was working on a TV show, and like a lot of people got furloughed for 4 months over the summer when the pandemic happened. And so I found myself for the first time ever with time. And I mentioned last episode that I had this idea, this name of Craftsman Creative sitting there from like 2018. So it was like 2 years that I'd been sitting on this name. I had the domain craftsmancreative.co. I had even figured out that I think I want to do online courses, and I had bought, how many people have done this? I bought a subscription to Thinkific for $79 a month and had that active for about 8 or 9 months before I actually turned it into a business. So I was spending $80 a month on something that didn't even have like a landing page. That's how I approached things back in the day. And I'm very different now. And it wasn't until 2020 when everything kind of clicked, because what happened was I watched all of my creative friends. You can probably, there's a photo on my wall, and this is a compilation or a collage of like 30 different musicians that I worked with. I was a live sound engineer for a decade and ran sound for bands like Neon Trees and Imagine Dragons, who all started here in Provo at Valor Live Music Gallery, where I ran sound. But half the people on that poster are not performing anymore. They're not writing and playing music anymore. Some of them because of the pandemic, others because they just didn't have the right mindset to turn their passion or their creative output into a business. So I looked at that poster and it all clicked. I realized that my life, my creative life, is about contribution, helping people grow and progress. I have one of those brains that likes to figure out problems and solve them. And it's very different than the typical artist brain, which is very much like I'm free-spirited and I don't like structure and I don't like spreadsheets and I don't like outcomes, and all those words are just like, man, you're killing my vibe. Let me just go create, right? And nothing wrong with that. unless you're trying to turn it into a full-time business and full-time revenue, in which case you do kind of have to think about that. So the sweet spot and the expertise that I found for myself was that I had been doing this job of a producer for 10, 12 years at that point. And the job of a producer is to be the logistics, the strategy guy for a bunch of creative people. So a writer is a creative person. A director is the key creator on a movie set or a TV show. The actors are creators. All of the department heads, your production designer, your makeup designer, your costume designer, they're all creative people. And in the movie industry, they all approach their business the same way. Start out, work your way up, get good, and then just keep working and say yes to every job, because the belief is if you say no, then they're going to call someone else, they're going to like them more, and then they're going to get the calls next time. So that's what everybody does, and they work themselves to death. They're working all the time. It's 12 to 14-hour days. So you're leaving your house at 5 a.m. and you're out until 6 or 7, and it's brutal. And I'm getting a little off track, but I'll bring it back right now. So I realized that I had a different approach to doing creative work. I found myself producing a movie in 2021, not having come up through that decade of working in film. So what was different was the approach. What was the mindset? And so the tilt that I came up with was this craftsman creative business aims to help creatives become full-time creators, to become content entrepreneurs, become creative entrepreneurs, to create businesses on their own terms instead of just doing whatever the default is. And there's a different default for every industry, whether you're an artist, a musician, filmmaker, whatever it might be. It's possible to create your business your way, which is what I did, and which is what I help people understand how to do through the content that I create. So I have courses that I created. That was the first iteration of Craftsman Creative, was doing a bunch of online courses. And I was directly helping other creators create a new revenue stream for themselves, right starting at the beginning of the pandemic. And it worked really, really well. And then I spun that off and turned it into a newsletter and turned it into a book. And now I have a community and I have all these different revenue sources after 2.5 years of doing this, because I started from the place of what Content Inc. teaches, to start from who am I serving? How am I, exclusively positioned in order to serve them? And then how can I tell them that like I'm doing this thing and that it will serve them? And that was a lot of the early work that I did.
Do you feel, and I'm curious what your take is, and I don't know if you even think about this, but I think about it all the time. If my differentiation is enough to cut through all the clutter, do you believe that your content tilt, your craftsman approach is enough to break through? Are you concerned? Like, what are you thinking about?
Well, I love that question. And I'm going to add another question to it because I hear this one phrased a lot more frequently, which is, do I have a small enough niche? Have I niched down enough? We're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
And so the antithesis of that is, well, I just got this DM the other day. I asked this guy, what do you do? He said, I teach Python. I said, okay, well, who do you teach Python to? I teach Python to everybody.
Oh, geez.
Literally word
everybody,
for word,
the dreaded everyone is my audience, right? Yeah.
My response was, dude, you're killing yourself here. So I literally walked him through, it was probably a 500-word DM response where I said, you need to focus on who specifically you serve. Are you teaching beginning Python to moms in their 50s who just got out of quilting class? Like, you can get that granular. And the very specific thing that is a mindset shift around this question is you don't want to just focus on demographics, but you want to focus on desires. And so here's what I mean by that. When I started out, my Craftsman Creative was for artists and creators. Anybody who's an artist or creator who's trying to create a business out of what they do, that's who I serve. Mm-hmm. Because you also hear from the startup world this idea of TAM, or total addressable market, which is a big thing, because if you're creating a product for a total addressable market of 500,000 people, well, you can't be Facebook, you can't be Instagram, you can't have 1 billion subscribers or 1 million people subscribed to net. How many people are on Netflix? Hundreds of millions. If they came out the gate and said, well, our total addressable market is 500,000 people, Netflix would never be what it is. So you kind of have to turn that off a little bit and go, okay, well, who's my ideal audience? And it's been really an 8 or 12 month process for me to be able to answer this question that you just posed now, which is, no, I'm really focused on creators who have been doing this for a while. They're already making 5 figures a year and they're stuck and they want to figure out how to make 6 figures a year. That is and that came from another moment of serendipity. I was in a community and I said, I'm working on a book. And this was before I started writing it. And somebody asked, well, what's your book about? And I said, well, it helps 5-figure creators build 6-figure businesses. And I just did it like in that moment.
Good elevator pitch.
Yeah. And I had a dozen people who I had never talked to them before. I didn't know who they were. They came out of the corners of that community and said, I need this book.
That's me. Yeah. You found a lot of that's me's, right?
I found a lot of that's me's. And if you look at my book, I'm not strategic like you putting it in the background of my thing here, but my book, it literally is called Craftsman Creative, subtitle, How 5-Figure Creators Can Build.
It's right here. It's right there.
That's the way to do it.
I got it right next to me. So I love that example.
That helped a ton because people can identify the very second. When I was at CEX and handing the book out to people, they looked at the cover, read the subtitle and said, oh my gosh, I need this book. So yes, it's super important, but that's where I ultimately landed for Craftsman Creative, because I want to be helping people who are already trying instead of at the very beginning of like, well, I've been trying, but it's been 2 weeks and I haven't made $1 million yet. It's
geez, but yes,
we run into that sometimes. And it's like, okay, you don't have the mindset yet of like being resilient and being resourceful and being patient and all those other things.
Now it's important. What I got from what you said was this is a process that doesn't come to you first day. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you 2 quick examples of how this worked for me. So our content tilt for content marketing was working really, really well until about 2010, 2011, when somebody came into the market. The company was called HubSpot, and HubSpot went heavy duty into something called inbound marketing, which has some of the same tenets as content marketing. People would disagree, but I was like, oh my God, HubSpot is targeting content marketers as well. And we're targeting content marketers. But then I realized, all right, I said, we don't have the resources to compete with somebody like that. What do we do? And I realized, oh, they're going after small businesses. What if we said our audience, well, let's niche that audience a little bit and say, we're not just targeting marketers, we're targeting content marketers at larger enterprises. That's a much different thing. That means we're talking about very complex content marketing issues. And it changed our whole editorial strategy just by going to enterprise instead of just every content marketer. So that worked. That was a game changer. That worked really well. And of course, led to us with a really solid exit in 2016. Same thing is happening right now at the Tilt. So when we launched Creator Economy Expo, so we launched it in May. We're going to have the next one in Cleveland, May 1st to 3rd. So we're doing it again. And it's going to be a different conference because the first one, I thought, oh, well, we're targeting all content creators. We're targeting YouTubers and bloggers and podcasters and yay, content creation. Now we're more aligned with where you're targeting. We're targeting this, I would call it professional or a serious content creator. Most of the people are in their second careers or third careers, if you will. They're not just right out of high school, right out of college. They're not on Twitch. They're more in the traditional content creation categories, if you will. And where we're really moving to a tilt is we're saying, look, leverage social media. Absolutely. But don't rely on it. So we are not a big believer in the models. And maybe we should talk about this because this is a really good starting point for your 0 to 500, not to rely on social media, or don't build your content house on rented land, if you will, because my heart goes out to my friends, and you have some too, on Instagram and on YouTube, that they just built their houses there and built their platforms there. By the way, nothing wrong with that, but had no strategy to move to what I would call up the subscriber hierarchy. So down lower, you've got Facebook and you've got Instagram, and you've got Twitch, and you've got YouTube and TikTok, and you've got all these social channels where you can't control the distribution. You have no control over the data or the platform. You've got to move up the hierarchy. Like in the middle is podcasting. So you see what we're doing is sort of in the middle. You have more control, but you still don't have control, but you want to get to probably email is sort of at the top. You could say maybe an owned membership site, but email comes first, if you will. So wherever your platform is, you've got to get some kind of email communication where you can control the distribution, you control those names, and you have some idea of who your audience is, and they have actually opted in to receive your messaging. That's really, really important. That was a game changer for us, where we got to about 10,000 subscribers for Content Marketing Institute. We got to the same thing happened for the Tilt. We got to about 10,000 subscribers at the Tilt. And then we said, now is the time where we can really start to drive revenue. We launched CEX, the event, having it again. That's going to be an annual thing. Started to launch our sponsorship strategy. So those things start happening at the 10. But ours was, I know you talk about sort of 10,000 followers, subscribers. I really focus on email subscribers as being important. But I guess, so would you say the 0 to 500 area, Daren, would be to focus on, yes, social media, we don't have a problem with it, but really now is to make sure you've got an email platform that's working for you?
Yes, I think I can speak. I'll share a very specific example, but what I see a lot is that people want to be creators and they go out and they start creating content on a platform without realizing that they need to create the business underneath that, the foundation. I actually just had a guest post go out on the ConvertKit blog last week where, well, as you're listening to this, maybe it's a month ago, but about how I built an $85,000 business with Craftsman Creative from an email list of less than 2,000 people and a follower list of less than 2,000 people at the time. And so there's a massive difference between a view of a piece of content, because you could have 1 million views and no dollars that came from that.
Sure.
There's a smaller difference, but still a big difference from number of followers on social media, because you might have 10,000 or 50,000 followers on Instagram, but that might not relate or translate into any dollars. But as soon as you have an email list and you can build a relationship with people, you can engage with people on a weekly or regular basis, and you're providing value week after week after week after week. And then after a while, you've released something that's a product that will serve them as your business, serving your customers. It's night and day. It's not even close, trying to sell something on Instagram versus trying to sell to your email list that you've built a relationship with. So here's a very specific example. When I started out, like I said, with Craftsman Creative, I started building these online courses with other creators. Now, in the first 2 years, I had creators that had 55,000 followers on Instagram, 85,000, 12,000, 15,000, and 0 email subscribers. Maybe they had 250 or 150 or whatever because they signed up because they knew they needed to have an email capture form on their website at some point, but they never did anything with it. So they were ignoring email, building up Instagram. When they launched their courses, I thought they would sell 1% of their audience, maybe 50 or 60 courses. I had people with 25 and 50,000 followers on Instagram sell less than 10 courses in their launch week. 55,000, less than 10 sales. Now, let's flip that around with a more recent example of someone who had just barely crossed the 10,000 mark on Instagram. But when we started working together, I said, look, what I need you to do is spend the next 3 months focusing on getting people off Instagram and onto your email list. Well, how do you do that? Well, we used ConvertKit and we built a landing page and we built a little welcome sequence. And over 3 months that we were producing the course and editing it and getting it ready for launch, she gained 350 people on this segment of her email list. And we used her email list, even though it was 350 people, to strategically launch her course. The first thing she did was a free workshop. 250 people from that email list signed up and attended that workshop. I'd never seen anything like it. At the end of that workshop, she sold 15 courses before the course was even out. And then during launch week, mainly from her email list, sold 100 courses. from her email list.
That's amazing.
And I can say that specifically because I have the tracking links that say, here's your Instagram link and here's your email link, because I want to prove to you and to myself and future creators how much stronger email is. And her email list of 350 people outperformed her following of 10,000. The other creator who launched that month, their following of 30,000, like by 10 to 1.
Yeah.
So what the mindset shift is for this episode is to not ignore social media, because you need awareness, and social media is a great way to get it, because the algorithms can put your content in front of people. You can get more awareness than just writing on your blog or on your email list, but get people off the platform onto your email list and build your business there, so that when Instagram changes its algorithm, or Facebook or YouTube, and says, we want to be like TikTok, and now photos don't matter anymore, and you built your business as a photographer on photos, your business doesn't go away. That's why you build your business on email, not on rented land, as Joe so adequately says.
Well, and it makes sense from when you think about why you get way more buying conversion off of something like that, because they have opted in. They know, like, and trust you, most likely. They probably, I mean, if you look at some of the stats out there, sometimes somebody will be on your list for 6 months or 9 months, but they now know you and love you, and they're going to buy whatever. I mean, when we were really getting into, I mean, I'll be honest with you, in 2009, so I started as a content creator, content entrepreneur in 2007. 2009 September, I had one of those moments, maybe people listening to this can relate, where I was giving up on the whole thing. Like, I started to get the LinkedIn profile going. We were bleeding cash. My credit card bills were like I had no money. I had 2 small kids at the time as well. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to go out and get a real job. I'm a complete failure, whatever. It didn't work. Stayed with the process. My wife said, hey, have you gone on in this long? Can we last another 6 months? That's when we really started to get into the pivot of content marketing. I said, oh no, this content marketing is a thing. We got to go all in on that one. And then we got to the point where we got the list of 10,000 email subscribers. That was critical. Really focused on a quality email. Our blog and email were our 2 platforms that we really focused on. You're right. Social media as awareness. It can still work that way today. But I want to share the example of you can make it with just a few people. We had 600 people sign up for the first Content Marketing World. It's not a lot of people. 600 people with the sponsorships and the registrations. It was a $950,000 event. We probably put $300,000 to the bottom line. I did not anticipate that event being profitable that year, but it was. 600 people from an email list at the time, probably of about 20,000, and a lot of help from partners. So the point about this whole thing is, if you focus on a really good email and they begin to believe you and rely on you, like, is that the email that they're not going to delete? Is that the email that's not spam? Because everyone has 1 or 2 every day that, oh, I got to read that email. If that's you, which hopefully it is, you can convert at a much higher rate. And you can have just Kevin Kelly's 1,000 true fans, or what Legion calls, 100 super fans. It is a model that can work. And to your point, it starts with email. Yes, social media, but figuring out your email, like, really take a hard look at it. Are you really delivering value? Do you have it as a conversion point to send people to? Is it in your email signature? Those things need to have, you need to put those things as part of your process as quickly as possible.
Perfect. So I think the strategy here, or the steps for people to take, if you haven't yet gone through Joe's book and this process of identifying your sweet spot and your content tilt, do that first, and then use that in your marketing and in your strategy to get people to pay attention to you online, and then pull them off of those platforms and into your email list. And the way you do that is by making it valuable for them. You got to be thinking about what's in it for them. Don't just say, my newsletter covers the top 5 things of this week, because, okay, who cares? Make it about them. The top 5 things that you can use to get X outcome. All of a sudden, it's the same structure, the same newsletter, the same email, but it's about them. And so utilize that content tilt in your marketing and address the needs and the desires that people want in the way that you're serving them. That's how you stand out. And that's how you get people to start coming to you instead of to competitors or elsewhere. And you can start building your business. I wish that I had done an even better job of this when I was starting out, because man, I've been on Twitter since 2009. Who knows what kind of follower I could have and how many of those followers I could have pulled into an email list over the last 13 years if I had started with that sort of an approach. So my hope is that people who are in that same position, they've been kind of stuck in that 0 to 500 range for a long time, that they can utilize this and it'll get them out of that and it'll get them to the next level, which is what we'll talk about in the next episode, that kind of 500 to 1,000. One thing we didn't touch a ton on was the revenue side of this, though. And just quickly, I think it's worth mentioning, like, there are a lot of very simple, low dollar things that you can do to start making money from an audience. There's also a lot of high ticket things you can do depending on the audience you're seeking to serve. So I get this question a lot, and maybe you do too. I'm very curious your answer, but people come to me and say, well, should I start with like $1,000 coaching package, or should I start with like a $7 ebook? And my answer is always, well, what does your audience need right now?
Yeah.
And if you don't know the answer to that question, it's because you're not listening or you're not asking, or maybe both. And so you got to think about, where's your audience at? If you're building an audience of people who need coaching because they have outcomes that they want to achieve in the next 90 days, and you know exactly step-by-step how to get them there in 12 coaching calls, by all means, charge $1,000, $2,000 a month and do coaching. And you'll have a business with 500 email subscribers like that. But if you're starting out and they don't see you as an educator or a coach or a guide or someone that is worth giving $500 or $1,000 or $200 to, then you got to start with where they are. And maybe what they need is some inspiration, or they need a guide of how to do one little aspect of their business, like how to set up an email or how to start a podcast or whatever it might be. You could create the guide or write a short book and charge $5, $10, $20 for that. And that's a way to get people on your email list and start making some of that money early on. But what do you think about that part of the equation, the $0 to $500 in revenue per month?
So I've been through this a couple of times, and most entrepreneurs have a real good idea of what they believe the revenue levers are going to be. And I'm a believer in that, and you should write that down and believe it and whatever. But most of the time we throw it out. It's meaningless, because in the 0 to 500 range where you're at, you're amenable to the opportunities in front of you from two sides, your audience and your possible sponsors. Now, I love the examples you gave to generate revenue from the audience. You can get one or two opportunities in there, but at 0 to 500, they're not as, there'll be more of those opportunities in the future than right now. I think the opportunities are on the sponsor side, or people that would sponsor to reach your audience. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how to do this. And this is how we kept the lights on when we started Content Marketing Institute. And we've done the same thing at the Tilt. We've been sponsor first, because what we have found is that there are larger companies who have a sponsor budget, have more money than they do expertise, or let's say even resources in that area to figure out what they should do. So what happens is that, let's say you have 5 or 10 companies that would sponsor to reach your audience, or they are talking the same language that you are. They're whatever your industry is, if it's creator economy or something like whatever it is, if you are in tourism, if you are food, or whatever the case is, you list those companies. And you say, okay, here's those companies. They want to reach our audience, but what are their pain points? Like literally, and do some research. You can easily find it. Go to their blog, go to their podcast. What are they missing? What do they need? So early days at Content Marketing Institute, I found a couple companies that were trying to do research projects, but weren't doing them very well. I'm like, oh, I can help with a research project. I'm working on some stuff myself. Reached out to a couple, did some sponsored research projects, did some writing for them, worked out. I got paid for those things. It kept me going at that 0 to 500 number that we're talking about. So those are really good. There were some companies that needed an expert. They needed a talking head. They wanted to do some interviews. They wanted to do some guest blogging. I reached out to them and I'm saying, now it sounds like you need some content marketing articles on your site. That's something that I can do. Here's what I charge for it. We got a conversation done. There were a couple of those big companies that really didn't understand the audience they were targeting. I said, I'm happy to do a 3-month consulting gig with you so you can really understand who your buyer personas are. These are just the things that happen. And the only reason they happened is I listed the company's names and I really did some research on what their biggest problem was. And when I reached out to the marketing director, they're like, what? Like, yes, we are struggling with that. And they were receptive right away. And these are all cold call emails, by the way. It's like, oh, hey, I've been checking out your site. It looks like you're a little deficient in this. Like, is this something I can help with? Oh my God, yes, absolutely. So you have to do a little bit of that work. So I totally agree with you on the audience side. You can create some niche products, if you will. But I think don't forget about the sponsor side. They have money to spend, especially today, recession or not. There's a lot of money out there. Look at those companies that have the money to spend that really want to become leading experts in their industry, and you can help them get there.
Amazing. So the strategy for the day, the next steps to take, figure out your tilt, figure out your sweet spot in the industry, utilize that to create value, however you choose to do that. And don't just focus on going viral on social media, but start thinking of your content as a business and approaching it that way, and start building some infrastructure, start building out some systems. I know these words are kind of scary to creators. You can check out my book because that talks a lot about how to do that. And if you haven't, you definitely need to get Joe's book because that's the model that we're following through this podcast. So very, very cool. I'm excited for people to listen to this episode because I think there's a lot of really great insights in here. I mean, I don't think about sponsorship at all, and I'm past the 0 to 500 mark. So, man, I'm thinking about how quickly the sponsors for this podcast came together. Where else can I start trying to implement that in my own business to add another revenue stream? So,
but it's a really good example. I mean, even with our great partners that we have, they're trying to reach a very specific audience. We named it the 10K creator. That's the aspiration. We said, are you trying to reach these people? Yes, absolutely. Well, this is the show for, right? It's not rocket science. So that's the next content piece of the next special episode that you could be doing, because you say, oh, that's who they're trying to reach. That's their audience. And I will do something exactly for that audience. So there you go.
So good. All right. Well, links to stuff that we've talked about will be in the show notes. And my goodness, next episode, I'm looking forward to this one too, because it's 500 to 1,000. We'll dive into some tips and some mindset shifts on that phase or that stage of the creator journey. And I know there's a lot of people in that range where they're making some money. They've got a little bit of an audience, but they haven't really cracked into it's a business yet. So that'll be fun to talk about.
I'm looking forward to that. Was a fun episode. I'm looking forward to it. And everyone listening and watching, we will see you next week.
Hey creators, that's it for today's episode. And another special thanks to our sponsors, Lulu, ConvertKit, and StreamYard for making this season of the 10K Creator possible. Now you can find links and show notes at 10kcreatorshow.com. And every week we'll have different giveaways for people who share the show with their friends and audiences. So head over to 10kcreatorshow.com to learn more. If you're listening for the first time, be sure to subscribe to the Content Inc. podcast, as this show will be on the Content Inc. feed each week. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.